I didn't go back to 1912 to watch history unfold. I went back to break it. For years, I had convinced myself that the tragedy of the RMS Titanic was a solvable equation, a collection of variables that just needed one external push to yield a different result. I had the satellite maps, the ice drift coordinates, and the precise timing of the collision down to the millisecond. I was going to be the savior of 1,500 souls. But as I stood on the tilting deck, watching the last distressed flare fizzle out into the freezing black void of the Atlantic, the sickening realization hit me harder than the iceberg ever could. The collision wasn't an accident. The captain's negligence wasn't the cause. The lookout's lack of binoculars wasn't the fatal flaw. It was me. I didn't fail to save the Titanic. I am the reason it sank. My obsession began in the dusty archives of a university library, but it ended in the freezing brine of the North Atlantic. As a historian specializing in early 20th century maritime disasters, the Titanic was my white whale. It was the perfect storm of hubris and bad luck, and I spent a decade building the temporal displacement device not to win a Nobel Prize, but to fix this specific scar on the timeline. Arriving in Southampton on April 10th, 1912, was an assault on the senses. The smell was the first thing heavy, suffocating mix of unrefined coal smoke, horse manure, and the salt spray of the English Channel. The crowd was a living organism of excitement, completely unaware that they were cheering for a mausoleum. I boarded as a third-class passenger, clutching a leather satchel that contained technology far beyond their comprehension. Disguised as a surveyor's journal, my plan was elegant in its simplicity. Use my knowledge of the future to alter the ship's course or speed just enough to miss the collision window. For the first 3 days, I attempted the diplomatic approach. I tried to access the bridge, posing as an experienced sailor who had seen ice fields drifting unusually south. I spoke to Second Officer Lightla, showing him hand-drawn charts that were actually traced from high-resolution satellite imagery I had memorized. He looked at me with that distinct Edwardian mixture of pity and condescension, dismissing me as a nervous steerage passenger who had perhaps indulged too heavily in cheap gin. They wouldn't listen. To them, the Atlantic was a conquered highway, and I was just a speed bump. As the date approached April 14th, panic began to gnaw at my rationality. I knew the timeline. I knew that at 11:40 p.m., the lookouts Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee would spot the iceberg. I knew I was running out of time to convince anyone of the impending doom. Desperation breeds dangerous ideas. If I couldn't convince the mind of the ship, I would have to cripple its body. On the morning of the 14th, I managed to slip into the lower decks, navigating the labyrinth of steel corridors that vibrated with the rhythmic pulse of the massive reciprocating engines. The heat in the boiler rooms was a physical weight, pressing against my lungs, tasting of sulfur and sweat. I wasn't supposed to be there. I was a ghost in the machine, dodging the soot-covered stokers who shoveled coal with a rhythmic, hypnotic cadence. I found a secondary pressure coupling on the line feeding the starboard propeller. My hands, usually steady with the precision of a historian turning archival pages, trembled violently. I used a stolen wrench to loosen the valve. A hiss of steam escaped, invisible and deadly. I wasn't trying to stop the heart of the ship. I just wanted to make it skip a beat. I calculated that a minor loss in pressure would force a temporary reduction in speed, a delay of perhaps 30 minutes while they diagnosed the leak. It worked, or so I thought. Around 4 p.m., the ship shuddered. The rhythm of the engines faltered. I felt the deceleration in the floorboards. The engineers were confused, scrambling to fix the unexplained drop in pressure. The ship slowed down for 45 minutes before the pressure was stabilized, and she resumed her cruising speed. I sat in my bunk, heart pounding, checking my digital chronograph hidden beneath my sleeve. Primera de Donne Italiano. I had delayed the ship. By my calculations, the iceberg would now drift across our path long before we arrived at the intersection point. We would cross the fatal coordinate miles behind the danger. I had changed history. Night fell, calm and moonless. The ocean was like a sheet of black glass, betraying no movement. I went up to the deck at 11:30 p.m., wanting to savor the victory. I wanted to see the empty ocean where the iceberg should have been. I stood by the railing, the cold air biting at my face, waiting for 11:40 p.m. to pass without incident. The minute hand on my glowing watch ticked forward. Las 11:38. Las 11:39 and las 11:40 silence. Nothing but the wash of the waves. I let out a breath. I didn't know I was holding Primera ad Don Italiano. The Titanic was safe. But then, at 11:45 p.m., a bell rang out. 3 sharp strikes. The phone in the wheelhouse buzzed. I froze. I looked out into the darkness and saw it a black shape blocking out the stars. It wasn't possible. We should have missed it. The ship groaned as the wheel was turned hard to port, but the momentum was too great. The vibration of the impact wasn't a crash. It was a long grinding scrape that vibrated through the soles of my shoes and into the marrow of my bones. I stared at my watch, horrified. 11:45 p.m. The collision had happened 5 minutes later than the history books recorded, and then the math realigned in my head. Terrible and absolute. The delay I costed 45 minutes slowdown earlier in the day hadn't kept us from the iceberg. It had placed us directly in front of it. Without my sabotage, the Titanic would have maintained its original speed. It would have passed this specific spot in the ocean miles ahead of the drifting ice. The iceberg would have passed harmlessly behind the stern. My intervention didn't prevent the disaster. It manufactured it. I had slowed the ship down just enough to synchronize its path perfectly with the trajectory of the ice. The universe hadn't fought back. It had simply used me as the instrument of its will. The next 2 hours were a blur of screaming metal and frozen despair. I didn't try to get on a boat. I didn't deserve to. I wandered the decks like a damned soul, watching the frantic goodbyes, the utter lack of preparedness. I saw Captain Smith, looking dazed, and I wanted to grab him by the lapels and confess, to scream that this was my fault, not his. But what good would it do? The water was already climbing the stairs. The grand staircase was vanishing beneath the Atlantic. I found myself near a collapsible boat D, the last one to leave. There was a child, a little girl shivering violently, separated from her parents in the crush. She was staring at the black water, paralyzed by the terror of the abyss. I knelt beside her. I had nothing to give her warmth, nothing to promise her safety, but I saw her eyes fixated on my wrist. In the pitch black of the sinking ship, the backlight of my digital watch was glowing with a soft, blue luminescence. It was an impossible object, a piece of technology from a century in the future. I unclasped it and fastened it around her tiny wrist. "It's a star catcher," I lied, my voice cracking. "As long as it glows, the darkness can't take you. Keep me safe." She looked at it, mesmerized by the artificial light, and allowed a crewman to lift her into the boat. I watched her drift away, a tiny speck of impossible blue light bobbing in the vast, consuming dark. I don't remember the end. The cold took my consciousness before the water took my lungs. The paradox of time travel is that the universe corrects itself, usually by ejecting the foreign object. I woke up back in the lab, gasping for air, dry but shivering with a phantom cold that has never left me. I destroyed the machine. I burned the notes. I tried to live a normal life, but the guilt was a shadow that never detached from my heels. Decades later, I found myself at an auction in New York. They were selling artifacts recovered from the debris field plates, jewelry, pieces of coal. The final item was listed as a mystery. The auctioneer spoke of it with confusion. It was a corroded, encrusted object found in a leather pouch belonging to a survivor who had passed away years ago. They displayed it on the screen. It was a digital watch, battered by the ocean floor, dead and silent. The catalog described it as an unexplainable anomaly, a hoax, or a mistake. But I saw the scratch on the bezel where I had banged it against the boiler valve while sabotaging the engine. It was the proof I needed. Time isn't a river you can divert. It's a closed loop. By trying to save them, Premeta doomed them. The watch sat there behind the glass, a monument to my arrogance, proving that some tragedies are structural pillars of reality. You cannot remove them without bringing the whole house down. The story of the Titanic has always been one of human arrogance, but perhaps the greatest arrogance is thinking we can control destiny. If this story made you question the nature of time and fate, please hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. I explore the darkest corners of history and the paradoxes that bind us. Like this video if you enjoyed the journey, and leave a comment below. If you had the chance to go back, would you try to change the past? Or are you afraid of what you might